Welcome to Healthy Lifestyle. I'm Lorianne Casdia. Our goal here at Healthy Lifestyle is to inspire, educate, and empower you to fulfill a healthy, emotional, spiritual, and physical life so you can feel empowered to live the life you have always wanted and dreamed. I want to jump right into welcoming our guest, Dr. Richard Freed. He is the Chief of Gastroenterology at Huntington Hospital and Assistant Professor of Clinical Medicine at Hofstra School of Medicine, and he practices all aspects of GI in Huntington Hospital. And my excitement about having him on as well is he actually has a personal story as it relates to the pandemic recently. So welcome to the show, Dr. Freed.
Thank you so much, Lorianne. I'm happy to be here. You were saying, in terms of a person, everybody sort of has their own story about COVID, and but I'd certainly be happy to share with you my own. At the beginning of towards the epidemic, my wife was undergoing chemotherapy at the time, and as I was sort of exposed to patients that had COVID, I was trying to maintain some distance and trying not to expose her and the rest of my family. So one of the people in my office became ill with the disease, and my wife said to me, well, you should go get tested. And I had no symptoms at the time, and I said to her, I'm like, yeah, you're crazy, I feel fine. She's like, do me a favor, just go get tested. She was immunosuppressed. She just wanted to know if I had it.
Sure.
I said, fine. So I went to the hospital the next day, had the swab, which if any of you have had a nasal swab for COVID, it's very unpleasant.
Very unpleasant.
They stick that thing up way up there. You feel like they're scratching your brain, And
well, good news is, though, they found one for me, so I was happy.
Well, that is good news. I'm glad to hear that.
I was too.
And about 2 hours later, I got a call that the test was positive.
Oh, my.
So I, kind of first I'm like, are you sure you're calling the right person? And they were like, absolutely, it's positive. And the nature of the swab test for the virus is that while there is an incidence of people that test negative who actually have COVID, it's about 10%. There's very few people that test positive that do not have it. So pretty much they told me that I had it, and I had to isolate myself. So first I arranged for everybody else in the family to come in and get tested. I have two daughters and my wife, and they came over and got tested. Unfortunately, they were all negative, but I had to go find some place to live. So to really kind of separate myself. So I went to a friend's house who had moved out, and nobody was living in her house. So I stayed there for a week. The only symptom I can really honestly say that I did develop was my lost sense of smell, which, as you know, can sometimes be a presenting symptom. Mm-hmm. So, it was in her house, and she had candles all over the place. So I lit one of these candles, and I'm like, oh, there must be something wrong with this. I can't smell it. Well, it turned out probably the reason for that was because I lost my sense of smell.
Wow.
But
that must be, so what is that? What is that like? Like, how do you identify that you lost it? Did you lose taste as well?
It was a scented candle that I basically stuck my face in it, and I couldn't smell it. And I thought something was wrong with the candle. And then I called her and said, you got this candle here that's, is it burned out or something? She's like, no, the thing is, there's nothing wrong with the candle. So that was sort of my experience with it. Some people also lose the sense of taste as well.
Right.
Because there are two senses that go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So I don't think I did. I mean, I certainly didn't notice if I lost the sense of taste. But I do have friends who had COVID who had lost their sense of smell, and it went on for weeks afterward.
Wow.
And it could take some time to come back.
Do we know what causes that loss?
They actually don't. As far as I know, I did a little research on it to try to answer that question, and I don't think it's really clearly thought if it's directly related to the virus or if it's a secondary phenomenon. I honestly don't know the answer to that. The one thing I do know is that people who present with that as their symptom tend to have a little bit more of a benign course of the disease. They don't usually go on to develop a lot of the other bad side effects in terms of fever and cough and shortness of breath that are the sort of typical presentations of COVID. For whatever reason, it's such an evolving field, and we're learning every day, learn something new that, maybe that was the data as of a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if that really still is even the truth anymore.
Yeah, well, it's ever growing, that information keeps changing because we're finding out more information. It doesn't mean that the other information was inaccurate. It's just the more information we gather from it, the more accurate we are finding the information is coming out now. So, because I heard a lot of people say, they don't know what they're talking about. It changes every day. And I was like, well, that's because they're, taking the data in and then, looking through it and finding conclusions to it, which may differ as the system goes on and as different presentations come, like that loss of sense, like you had said, that it's usually less impactful when you have that, which is a good thing to note. Now, what are you finding as far as gastro symptoms in the patients you saw for COVID, or were there any?
There definitely is. It's rarely is it the presenting symptom.
Mm-hmm.
The typical presenting symptoms that we see, the cough and the fever and the shortness of breath, those are the overwhelming symptoms. But there was a big study, mostly out of China, where they looked at GI manifestations of COVID, and by far and away, the most common one is diarrhea. That if any of them have GI manifestations, they get diarrhea, and that's about 20% of patients with COVID. And the other thing, sometimes you can see some abdominal pain, some nausea and vomiting. It is known that COVID can be transmitted in the stool, so that is a way that you can catch it. Within a household, if you have somebody that has COVID, it's not a bad idea as part of their isolating themselves to have their own bathroom.
Right.
And obviously, being careful in terms of hand washing and the like. But that's a typical thing. So it's not a common manifestation with COVID, but it definitely is one of the things that can happen.
Did you get an antibody test?
I did, and I was negative.
That's so strange that you said that. I got an antibody test. It was negative, but back in February, what you're saying as these presenting features, I had them. Yeah. So I thought I had the flu, and because I had the test done and it was negative, I was like, I guess I didn't have COVID. But I'm telling you that all of these things that you're saying was how my air quotes flu presented itself. So I was convinced, and still am convinced, that I had it already.
Yeah, again, as you were referring to before, that it's such an evolving field. I mean, it really is. The antibody thing changes every day, and I was one of the first. Northwell ran a program where they were really testing all their employees, and the people who were first on the list are the people who were COVID positive. So I was kind of one of the first people that got tested. So as a result, it's possible that it may have been too soon, because it takes several weeks to develop the IgG antibodies for the test to turn positive. So I actually probably should go back and get retested, because I may be positive now. But the other thing that has evolved, and again learned since I've had this, is that there's a significant percentage of people, especially the people that don't get too sick with it, that don't really mount a significant antibody response. So it is possible, because I was mostly an asymptomatic carrier, that I didn't get sick enough to mount an antibody response. Yeah,
so I had that back in February, and I had the antibody test done in, I want to say, end of April, beginning of May. So many weeks had passed.
So that's enough time. It's usually 3 to 6 weeks to kind of build up the IgG antibodies.
Yeah, that should have been enough time, yeah. But the thing is, too, after that, 2 weeks later, I came down with diverticulitis, which happened. So I had a bad case of diverticulitis, went to the hospital for it. That's how bad it was. And And I went into the walk-in, and the look of horror on the woman's face back in February, because it had just started, was just, I'll never get that look out of my face. And she says, you really need to go to the hospital. And I was just like, okay. So they then took me over to the hospital. But I was barely able to stand from the diverticulitis. But
oh boy.
Yeah. So, but that happened like a week later. So I'm wondering if there was some kind of connection. I had always been wondering if that's the case. But so with antibody testing, so even if you test negative, you might have had it, but it's just, we may not. There's also study out there that I read about that if you have O blood, and I'm O negative, if you have O blood type, that you're less likely to present on your antibody testing. Have you heard that as well?
I've heard that as well. Yes.
Yeah.
And I honestly don't know what that means or how that happens. The interesting thing that I've heard, again, as the field, that even with negative antibodies, that it still seems that there's different types of immunity. There's immunity, sort of the immunity from antibody-mediated immunity, and then there's something called cell-mediated immunity. So it's possible that by being re-exposed to the virus again, like yourself and I, that if we were to get re-exposed, that our bodies may actually be able to fight it off using this other form of immunity. So having negative antibodies doesn't mean that you necessarily can get it again, but it also doesn't mean that you're absolutely protected against it again. So nobody really knows what it is. Yeah.
It's so evolving. That's why the vaccine is a little nerve-wracking for me at this point, because we're not sure, what are we vaccinating, and should it be a different vaccine depending on how you present it? So I'm wondering, where do you find the proper vaccine, and we just don't have enough information on it yet.
I know.
And
so the pressure to develop the vaccine. Normally vaccines take years to develop, and the pressure to crank this out within a couple of months is enormous. And people got to make sure they do it right, and that it really is going to be protective. And we don't really know the answer to that.
Right.
And it's a very scary thing, because I don't see anything changing for some time,
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
And the feeling with sending that out, if we're still gathering information, we should probably wait so that we don't jump to something that doesn't work, and then unfortunately some people will be exposed unnecessarily.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know the answer to that. I think, personally, as long as they have the safety data for a vaccine, to me, I would be first. I would be one of the first in line.
Yeah.
But as long as they can prove to me that it's safe. But I don't really know the answer.
And I don't know the answer either. And I think a lot of people, really brilliant scientists out there, and people who are developing this, don't have all the answers yet, but that they're working through it. We just need to wait as they work it through and gather this type of very useful information. So here's another question for you, Dr. Freed, is what kind of gastro symptoms should bring someone to see a specialist like yourself?
In the setting of COVID, or you mean just in general?
I think in the setting of COVID / in general. So I know I have colitis, so I go to my gastroenterologist every year.
Mm-hmm. So, the things that we get very concerned about is when somebody presents with, there's certain symptoms that we consider red flags. So if somebody, say, for example, has difficulty swallowing, that's something that needs to be evaluated right away. Somebody who's had significant weight loss over a fairly short period of time that's unexplained. Somebody that's had a radical change in their normal bowel pattern, again, is something that we have to evaluate. And then, going down the line of colitis, people that have had problems with rectal bleeding, it's obviously the differential diagnosis for that is pretty long, but some of the things in that list have to be treated and have to be jumped on. So those are the kind of things that, as a gastroenterologist, if somebody walks in the office with those complaints, those are things that I would evaluate, COVID or not. And, even in the midst of the epidemic, we had basically had to stop most of our elective procedures for people that had symptoms that, of urgent, that needed to really be evaluated. We were still, doing what needs to be done and doing those things in the hospital or in the office.
Right. Was it being presented with your COVID patients? Was it being presented this way?
I mean, most of those things, again, since gastrointestinal issues weren't really a big presenting part of COVID, I didn't see a lot of those patients that had that.
Right.
There are certainly situations in which people can develop. I mean, one of the things we've learned about COVID, again, over the last several months is the incidence of blood clotting, that a lot of those patients are very high risk for blood clotting, whether it be blood clots in their lungs, they can get blood clots to their intestine as well. So we would occasionally see these catastrophic presentations of patients with COVID who are very sick.
I wonder... I'm sorry. I wonder if because I do have something like colitis, or people with colitis, or what's the opposite of colitis? Crohn's. Crohn's. So if they have that normally, I wonder if COVID presents its way that way because that's our weakest area.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And there's actually been some data, again, this is all sort of an evolving field, looking at what to do with patients with Crohn's and colitis. We as a gastroenterologist, we take care of those patients. A lot of the medicines that we use suppress their immune system. So we're very nervous about continuing those medicines in the setting of COVID. Are you putting patients at a higher risk by continuing medicines that suppress the immune system? And it kind of applies all throughout both with rheumatologic patients and gastrointestinal patients. And what the studies really suggest is, obviously, it's on a case-by-case basis, but in general, you're better off continuing these immunosuppressive medicines rather than stopping them, because the risk of getting sick and needing to be hospitalized on steroids in the setting of COVID is worse than continuing a medicine that might be suppressing your immune system.
Yeah, that all makes sense. It seems like there are also more cases of celiac. Is that really the case, or is it just...
It's a little controversial. I think, we're testing more and more. I mean, I don't mean to sound necessarily like the president, but I think we are. This is one of those settings in which we are definitely finding more celiac, because I think everybody's much more attuned to it, and I think the tests are much more widely available. So whether it's a true increase incidence, which it kind of seems like that it is, or if it's really sort of a selection bias, I don't entirely know the answer. I mean, certainly as a gastroenterologist, I see a lot of celiac, and maybe that has to do with some of the exposure that we're giving kids certain types of cereals at when they're very young, or whether it's an environmental thing that has to do with the biome in the intestine. That's actually what a lot of the theories are. Is a lot of the bacteria that we carry around may predispose to celiac disease, but I honestly don't know the answer to that.
Yeah. Yeah, it just sometimes, when things start getting talked about, it's elevated in our awareness. It seems like it's more prolific, and it may or may not be. So similar to this pandemic, because of the advent of social media and 24/7 news, it has a different reaction to this pandemic. Even though the pandemic of 1919 actually resulted in more deaths, if you equate it to population, than it does during this pandemic. I'm not reducing the impact of it, but it definitely is a lot more in our awareness 24/7, and perhaps maybe that's why we're having the reaction that we are. But and not really allowing people like yourself and the medical community and the scientific community that bandwidth to be able to find these solutions.
Absolutely. I mean, the pressure, because just the nature of the constant drumbeat of hearing about the disease and the pressure people, that scientists are under in terms of development of new drugs and treatment. I absolutely agree with you. There really is, kind of goes hand in hand. Again, not taking anything away from the significance of it.
Absolutely.
Really, in our lifetimes, have never seen a pandemic like this. Especially one that affected, the developed world. We've obviously seen epidemics of Ebola and things like that.
Sure.
To have something spread so fast like this, certainly in my career, I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, it's just amazing. In our last few minutes together, Dr. Fried, if you could tell anything to our listeners, what would that be? What advice would you give them?
Oh, boy. I would say, as far as COVID goes, that, just basically to follow what the recommendations are, be careful to wear a mask. We're very lucky at least in New York, that our incidence has gone down tremendously, but it's really not a reason to let down your guard. I mean, people travel back and forth from New York to Florida all the time, and so I'm very worried about seeing a second wave here, and very nervous about that.
Yeah.
That unfortunately we all kind of see something like that happening on the horizon, and we have to be prepared for it.
Well, it's like anything else. If we're prepared for it, then we'll receive it better, and we get better at handling things. I don't think anybody is beyond learning how to handle things when it's the first time we've ever seen something like this. So with that said, thank you so much, Dr. Fried, for being on. I'd love to have you on again. I think our listeners will gain so much knowledge from you, and really appreciate your time and your input.
Thanks so much, Lorianne. It was a pleasure. It was nice to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you, too. We will be right back. You're listening to Healthy Lifestyle with Lorianne, and we're just going to take a little break and be right back. Welcome back to Healthy Lifestyle. I'm Lorianne. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas you'd like to hear more about, please email us at healthylifestylewithla@gmail.com. And please follow us on social media at Healthy Lifestyle with LA. There you can find all of our episodes and be able to catch up, follow, and just continue hearing what we have to bring for you. So with that said, today, after we spoke to the great Dr. Richard Fried, we are here with Dr. Martin Karpeh, who recently joined Northwell Health and Huntington Hospital. He's the chair of surgery and will be a critical part of the upcoming cancer center near the hospital. And he was part of the group that created the hospital's safe pathways for surgical patients and other non-COVID patients. And that's really, what I want to talk about is to talk about how patients who don't have COVID can safely go through surgical procedures, because we are back in the place where we need to get things addressed and alleviating that nervousness. We're already a little nervous anytime we get a procedure. Alleviating that extra element of nerves is really wonderful. And Dr. Karpeh is right behind that. Welcome to the show, Doc.
Hi there. Thank you.
Thanks so much for being on. So how did you help create the safe pathway for surgical patients post-COVID?
So as you can imagine, COVID's been on everyone's mind, and Huntington Hospital was really right in the thick of things early on. And I'm very, very proud to say that as of this week, we've had as little as 0 patients with COVID in-house. I think there may be 2 or 3 now that came in and we found out incidentally just through our testing processes. But we've come a long way to lower the incidence of COVID patients in the hospital. And during that time, as you know, the state had really stopped all hospitals from doing elective surgery, and it gave us time to really think about how we were going to bring patients back online. And at Huntington Hospital, we had gotten together with the OR staff and our administrators, infectious disease partners, and really anyone who had anything to do with COVID infections and patient care, and put our heads together to figure out really what's the safest way to bring patients back online and to begin to start up with elective surgery again. And this really starts in the surgeon's office. We're screening patients, making sure that we've asked questions about symptomatology, educating patients about the fact that we are still looking for signs and symptoms of COVID. Having cleared patients in the office, really the next step was to ensure that we had a safe pre-admission testing program. So patients would then come in, be screened again with temperature, history and physical, masks, hand sanitation, and all of the things that you might expect. And then blood testing for, nasal swab testing for COVID. We wanted to try and do that as close to surgery as possible. Initially, we had planned for 2 separate testings, one a week out and then again at 48 hours. But as the incidence in Long Island has come down, we've narrowed that to one test within 72 hours of surgery. Once we know that the patient has been tested negative, they are brought in, escorted by one of our escorts. We have a safe pathway through the hospital, although, again, the incidence is very low at the moment. So the likelihood of anyone encountering a patient who's positive is quite low.
Right.
And I should also mention that all the employees at Huntington Hospital are screened with temperature and are constantly reminded about signs and symptoms and encouraged to stay home if they do have any symptoms.
How do you create that? And that's great news, because obviously you don't want them to expose other of the staff who's at the hospital helping the patients, plus exposing the patients. But how do you create that safe pathways for that surgical patient?
So, literally during the thick of things, we created literally a pathway where patients would be greeted at the door and screened from their cars. Actually,
yeah.
We don't have to do that now that they get pre-tested, but they're still greeted at the door once we know they're negative. They're given a mask, hand sanitizer. They're escorted to a special elevator that takes them directly up to the surgical floor. They're met with a greeter and taken right to our pre-admission testing area, or ASU rather. And now we're allowing one family member to escort the patient until they go into the operating room. And then they're asked to leave the hospital, and we notify them once the procedure's finished, and they can come back. And if the patient's going home that day, they can meet the patient to go back home.
Right.
But,
what would you say to anyone thinking about getting surgery now and is still a little nervous?
I would say that it's extremely safe. Much safer than, say, walking through the grocery store.
Yeah.
The patients around, the people around you that you'll encounter have all been screened and are acutely aware of signs and symptoms of COVID. This hospital was really hit hard, and everyone really, really stepped up to meet the challenge, and as such is acutely aware of the impact of COVID, and is doing everything possible to keep people safe. So the employees here, as I said, we've all been tested. The hospital provides free testing to ensure that people who have antibodies are aware. And those that are negative, do everything possible to continue to stay negative. So it's a very safe environment, and what we fear is that patients with significant symptoms are holding off and putting themselves at risk because of fear. And I hope I can allay some of that fear and let them know that it is quite safe to come in, and fortunately, New York has done a lot to adhere to the guidelines, and as such, we've got much lower infection rates than some of the other states in this country. So, Huntington Hospital is extremely safe. I think I can say that for all of the Northwell hospitals. we've really put in pretty uniform guidelines. And
Yeah, there's an ongoing theme that, over the last few weeks, we've had various Northwell health caregivers here on the show. And the theme has always been about, across the board care, making sure there's safety for both the employees, the medical caregivers, and the patients. And I've seen, and know of many people who have gone in for their procedures that they should have been going in for, and they had an amazingly good experience. Matter of fact, one friend of mine was actually the driver of someone getting an elective surgery done, and when they dropped her off and she got escorted up, he was allowed to stay with her for a period of time, and then, like you had said, they asked him to leave because then she proceeded on to the next step, and he got a text message, came back, was able to pick her up, and everything. He was safe, she was safe, the staff was safe. Everybody felt really great about the experience, and I think that's the important thing to note here, is that it is safe and that you are taking that into consideration, not only for yourselves, but for everyone. So what do you see as the future of surgeries at Huntington Hospital, and specifically more minimally invasive procedures?
Sure. Well, one of the reasons that I was brought to Huntington is to be not only chairman of surgery, but to be director of surgical oncology for our Eastern region. And Huntington Hospital has been deemed the cancer hospital for the Eastern region.
Oh, wow.
And so the future of Huntington is to provide expert cancer care. We've teamed up with Cold Spring Harbor and are looking to provide translational types of care to our patients here at Huntington. The whole goal really is to provide comprehensive, coordinated care to all of the Eastern region hospitals. That's Huntington, Southside, and Peconic Bay, with Huntington being the main cancer hospital out east. So citizens of Suffolk County, can rest assured that they're getting really the best cancer care that they could really get anywhere. We've done heavy recruiting to get fellowship trained oncologists, not only in surgery but in medical oncology, radiation oncology, and we're in the process of identifying a location to put up a new building, which will all be able to commingle in one site.
That's a cancer center, yes, that you're looking for location?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're really excited. As far as surgery goes, I think one of the big changes that we've seen really in the past few decades is our ability to become a bit less radical in the things that we do, using minimally invasive surgery, using techniques like sentinel lymph node mapping that we use in breast cancer surgery. We use it in melanoma. Years ago, we used to do quite large operations, removing a great number of lymph nodes to ensure that all cancer has been removed. Nowadays, we can be much more specific about where we can extend the operation if we need to, really identifying where the cancer is and focusing our attention on those locations. There's been a lot in the news recently about immunotherapy, which has also altered how surgical oncologists think about surgery. We're not necessarily going to operate for every diagnosis.
Right.
So we do a lot to evaluate the patients, try and figure out that the proper diagnosis has been arrived at, that we understand the extent of patient's tumor, and then plan with our radiation and medical oncologist a treatment plan that we can present to the patient.
Yeah. So is the vision of this cancer care center, is it similar? So when my mom went through her cancer. She actually, down south in South Carolina, she actually would go to this one building, and in that one building, anything basically she needed for her treatment was in that one building. She literally would walk in that building and then a couple hours later walk out of that building, but she would be able to get anything she needed associated with her treatment plan. Is that what the vision is for this care center?
Exactly.
That's a beautiful thing to be able to do that. I know that Mom was so grateful for that because prior, on her first episode, she had to go from one building, and then my dad would drive her up the block to a different doctor and drive her down across the city to another doctor. But now they were all under this one building, and it's a beautiful vision, and it makes it so much easier as you're going through this very challenging time.
Absolutely. And living on Long Island, everyone realizes if you can stay off the road, if you can minimize the amount of travel back and forth, it's a good thing.
Without a doubt, and not have to go into the city anymore to get the kind of care that you really want to have. I mean, we have great care coming out of Northwell Health, without a doubt. And as a surgical oncologist, I wanted to ask you this, Dr. Karpeh, is what are the biggest challenges in care you've noticed over your career?
Well, I think, unfortunately, our care is so fragmented. And one of the challenges is really trying to coordinate care and make sure that patients are getting expert opinions at every step of the way. I'll just give you a quick example. Very few people think about pathology when they're diagnosed with a cancer, and making sure that the diagnosis is correct, which really sets the whole treatment plan in motion, is key. And so one of the big things for me has been ensuring that your slides, your biopsies are read by the appropriate people. And it's one of the reasons why, having a coordinated team is so important. We review the new cases when they come in. We're ensured that the pathology is reviewed, and if there's any question, we'll find the expert in the system or in the country for that particular disease, and ensure that we're on the right path. So I think, I trained years ago at Sloan Kettering. I was on the staff there for a number of years. And when I left and went to other hospitals, one of the big changes was really getting generalists to think in specific ways. And having a cancer program like we have here at Northwell, at least gives me that confidence that when I have a diagnosis, it's the right one, and it's been vetted. So,
and it's really good to have what I refer to as a healthcare quarterback who gets all of that information in and makes sure all things are being vetted and doing exactly what you're saying, sending it and having it reviewed by the right expert. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's somebody in that particular hospital. It could be somebody in another hospital. Why not get the best of the best? And I see that as a really great advantage of Northwell, is that you have all these really amazing doctors available and researchers and scientists available to allow you to give the best care to the patients. And having that coordination goes back to your vision for the care that's going to be in the cancer center. So I know that's the thing that was successful the first time, not so much. The second time was more successful for my mom, was to have that doctor who was the quarterback with a team, and everybody on that team spoke to each other and knew everything about the patient. And it was great because the quarterback didn't know all the information by themselves. So if something happened to the quarterback where they weren't available, everybody on the team was had the knowledge that they need, a well-rounded knowledge base on that particular patient. And I think that's wonderful that you do that and that you continue to build that. And we're very lucky to have you here, Doctor. Really, really very pleased that you're with our system now.
Well, thank you. I'm certainly happy to be here. The colleagues that I've met and the ones that I've known from the past that are here are all experts in their field, and I'm just happy to be part of the team.
Well, Dr. Karpeh, you are a joy. I really appreciate you being on. If you had one thing, I always do this with our guests here for our listeners. If you had one thing to tell our listeners in 30 seconds or less, what would that be? What kind of advice would you give them?
If you're symptomatic and you're concerned about something, don't hesitate to come to the hospital. It's a safe place to be. We're here to help you to improve your health, and we want to have that opportunity. So please don't stay at home. Come into the hospital, go see your doctor, but don't stay at home and be symptomatic. We like to catch things early, not too late.
Yeah, absolutely. That's brilliant advice. Thank you so much. And everyone listening, we had that from Dr. Fried as well. Dr. Karpeh, they're all saying the same thing. Is it safe? Come on in, not to worry. Thank you again, Dr. Karpeh, for being on today and joining us. We really appreciate your insight. Thank you all for joining us today on Healthy Lifestyle with Lorianne. My heart is always filled by sharing this time with you, bringing great guests like we did today in Dr. Richard Fried and Dr. Martin Karpeh of Huntington Hospital and the Northwell Health System. So, and as always, I want to thank our producer, Michael. You're the best. We are here to serve one another. So please, I remind you, take a moment, step out of your day, do a little something for someone else. In the meantime, thank you for joining us on Healthy Lifestyle. I'm Lorianne Casdia. Until next time, play a higher role, serve a higher purpose, show up for you, and show up big.